Hi there. Thanks for tuning in for the sermon video for Trinity Mennonite Church on August the 2nd. The question for today is, if you had the power to miraculously create food for thousands of people, how much would you keep for yourself?
Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 to 21. When Jesus heard about John, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. When the crowds learned this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When Jesus arrived and saw a large crowd, he had compassion for them and healed those who were sick. That evening his disciples came and said to him, "This is an isolated place, and it's getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "There's no need to send them away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here except 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." He said to them, "Bring them here to me." He ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish, looked up to heaven, blessed them, and broke the loaves apart and gave them to his disciples. Then the disciples gave them to the crowds. Everyone ate until they were full, and they filled 12 baskets with the leftovers. About 5,000 men, plus women and children, had eaten.
This is a beautiful story, isn't it? We look at this story for the first and second time when we're children. We see this as a story that tells us that Jesus has the miraculous power to feed people. Jesus has miraculous power, and we also see that Jesus is compassionate. He looks over at the crowd, he sees their needs, and he decides to respond to those needs. And if that's all we get from the story, then we've done what we're supposed to do. If that's all that we get from this, then we've read it correctly. But we can look a little deeper. When I was looking at it this week, I found that the introduction of the story almost kind of begs some different questions. It says that Jesus withdrew to a deserted place by himself. And looking at the context of what was happening before, it seems pretty obvious that Jesus withdrew because he was tired. And of course he's tired. The crowds have been following him constantly. He speaks in a house and the crowds fill the house. He's performing miracles and they gather around so that everybody can get a miracle of their own. The crowds have been pestering Jesus and he can't get away. So finally he gets an opportunity. He wants to sneak off by himself to rest. But this almost seems to go against the picture of Jesus that we get from the actual story. Jesus, in the rest of the story, has the miraculous power to make food. Well, then how is he then able to get tired? Shouldn't he have the miraculous power to give himself energy? And if Jesus is compassionate, as we see, then why is he getting away from the crowds? Does he love the crowds, or is he tired of the crowds? We ask these two questions, and in some ways it's because we identify with being tired, but we want to worship a God who doesn't get tired of us, certainly. Well, this past week, as I was thinking over this passage of Jesus getting tired, I went for a hike. And it's sort of coincidental. I got a call from a good friend, and the two of us decided that we were going to go hiking together. And we wanted to do a long hike, a day hike. So he and I drove out to the mountains, and we set out to get to the lake that the trail was going to take us to. And when we got there, I took a picture. That's what we do these days. I took a picture of the lake, and later on, I put it on Instagram. That's what we do these days. Well, I got a comment a little bit afterwards from one of my family members. And this is from a sister who's planning on maybe coming out to visit at some point. And she looked at the lake that I had taken a picture of, and she wrote something along these lines that I can feel my lungs filling with air just looking at this picture. Now, I sort of get what she meant. That the mountain air is refreshing, that it was so isolated it would be good, clean, fresh air, and the valley with the flowers and all of that would be invigorating. I'm guessing that's what she meant. But I had hiked 7.5 kilometers uphill to get there. We'd gained 800 meters in elevation. My lungs were not filling with air nearly fast enough. I was tired. And the way that this particular hike was laid out, after the 7.5 kilometers, you got to a lake, a beautiful lake, a good resting spot, an isolated spot. But from there, you could, if you wanted to, hike another 2.5 kilometers to another lake. And if you wanted, you could go another 2.5 from there to a point on the ridge, and you could look over on both sides of the mountain range. And so we were doing pretty well after the first lake, so we decided we would go on to the next one. And we encountered a man coming the other direction. But where we encountered him, we were crossing what I guess is called scree, just rocks from a previous rock slide. There was a bit of a path, but still you had to walk carefully on these rocks. And it was uphill, and it was steep, and it was hard. And we saw this man coming, and so just almost out of conversation, we asked him, "Does it get any easier?" And this is sort of us reaching out, and in spiritual terms almost, we were looking for a word of reassurance. We were looking for hope. But this man had none to give. Without hesitation, he said, "No, it gets worse." And then he added to a question we hadn't asked. He said, "And coming down isn't any fun either." The hiking trail isn't a place for false hope. It is a place of work, and it is a place of rest at the right times. This man hadn't come to give us any false reassurances, but he said exactly what we needed to hear, because it didn't get easier, and the way down wasn't any more fun. A hike is a fascinating place because as tired as you are, you have to keep walking. They're not sending in a helicopter to rescue you. You've got to keep going. And that's at the core of the message that he gave us and that we needed to hear. You've got to keep going because it's only going to get harder. But when you get to the lake, it'll be beautiful. And it was. We've read the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 after he was retreating away because he was tired. But there's another passage from Paul's letter to the Galatians. And in chapter 6, verse 9 of that letter, he writes, "Let's not get tired of doing good, because in time we'll have a harvest if we don't give up." Paul gives an instruction here which almost sounds like a commandment. Let's not get tired of doing good. But we can't really choose that, can we? Right? If this old man, and he was older than us, which wasn't terribly reassuring either, because he was doing much better than we were. But if this guy had said, "Oh, don't be tired. Let's not be tired, guys," we would have been entirely incapable of following his instructions. And so when Paul says, "Let's not get tired of doing good," it seems particularly difficult to follow. Many of the people that I talk to these days are tired. And some of it is connected to the pandemic, of course. We're tired of all of the regulations that we have to follow. We're tired of feeling the stress of, are we going to get sick from this? Is this what's going to catch us? Am I washing my hands enough? Am I wearing the right mask? All of that is tiring. And then on top of that, there are other concerns about education. There are other concerns about the economy. And then on top of that, just our regular lives of managing our own relationships, managing our own energy. We are tired. Many of us are tired, and that's not a bad thing. It's not because we are weak. the circumstances of our lives have made us tired. So, what does Paul mean then? How can we follow these instructions? Well, just like this hike that I did, you can help to prepare yourself to not get tired. When you're on the side of the mountain, it's too late for you to decide that you don't want to be tired. What you need to do is you need to have prepared ahead of time. So, we did this. We knew that this was going to happen, so we brought along water. We brought along snacks. We brought along bug spray and sunscreen. We brought all of the things that we needed to keep us comfortable. Preparation is an important part of not getting tired. And so, for us to not get tired of doing good, we need to prepare ourselves knowing what's going to come and preparing ourselves to give ourselves endurance and to make ourselves efficient doers of good. Well, the other thing that's needed is to have a good sense of reward. We orient ourselves toward the reward. And so in Paul's letter to the Galatians, he reminds us, he reminds that church and every church that would read it afterwards, that if we don't get tired, if we continue the work, then in time we will experience a harvest. We will reap a reward later on for the good that we are doing. And so when we orient ourselves toward that reward, when we orient ourselves toward that, then the work is less tiring. Then the work seems more doable. That's the important thing. Earlier this week, we saw a funeral for a prominent politician in the United States whose name was John Lewis. John Lewis was one of the main figures in the civil rights movement in the United States, and he spoke about fatigue, and I thought it was particularly relevant to this. He was part of the March on Washington in 1963, the youngest speaker of that gathering. And this is an excerpt of the quote this is a quote from the speech that he gave at that gathering. He said this: "To those who have said, 'Be patient and wait,' we have long said that we cannot be patient. We do not want our freedom gradually. We want to be free now. We are tired. We are tired of being beaten by policemen. We are tired of seeing our people locked up in jail over and over again." So if, back to my hiking story, if we had told this man that we were tired, he couldn't tell us to stop being tired, and he couldn't also say, okay, well then just go home, because going home would also have made us tired. We could say to a young John Lewis, we could say to civil rights protesters and activists now, well, if you're so tired, then just give up. But that's not the kind of tired that he was talking about. Many of us are tired of this situation. Some of us are tired of hearing about the stories on TV, tired of seeing athletes taking a knee during national anthems. Some of us are tired of hearing the issue being brought up again and again. And a lot of us are tired of having to endure one more story of racial injustice, hoping that we as society will have moved on beyond that. But there's a difference between being tired of hearing something and being tired of a situation. There was a basketball game earlier today, and in the build-up to it, there was a quote from civil rights protesters of long ago where they said, "We are sick and tired of being sick and tired." And from that doesn't mean, okay, and we're tired and so we're giving up. The understanding is they were tired and so they were going to kick it up a notch. So, are we tired of doing good, or are we tired of the evil that we're fighting against? You see, within the civil rights movement that John Lewis was leading, There was a strategic component to fatigue. Because they were tired of the situation, they were tired of the lower status that they had been given in society. And so they were going to fight back, hoping that the police and the government authorities would get tired of arresting them and give up. Or they were hoping that the national television news audience would get tired of seeing the mistreatment that they were getting at the hands of the police. You see, the strategic approach to fatigue was what eventually worked. They were tired of being abused, but they used that to their advantage, because only when the rest of us were tired of them being abused could it change. And going forward, this is what is still going to be required. We can't just be tired of hearing about injustice. We have to be tired of injustice and respond. Just like Paul's command that we have to orient ourselves towards the reward, our orientation determines if our fatigue is good or if it is not. We have an understanding of who Jesus is, that he was both fully human and fully divine. That his divinity didn't interfere with his humanity, and his humanity didn't interfere with his divinity. So when Jesus was tired here at the beginning of this story in Matthew chapter 4, is that because this is part of his human weakness? Or is this because he was divine? We even see in the creation story that God rested. That resting is part of a divine rhythm. Jesus getting tired and needing rest wasn't just part of his fallen, weak humanity. It was also part of his divineness, his divinity. And so, if Jesus knows to rest, then we get to rest as well. That rest is part of our preparation for doing good. So if we want to follow Paul's instructions to not grow tired of doing good, then there are three parts of this. We prepare ahead of time so that we are ready, that we are equipped for the work that we're doing. We also orient ourselves towards the reward. We orient ourselves towards the goal that we are seeking. When we are prepared and when we are properly oriented, we don't get tired as easily. But we do get tired, and so at appropriate times we rest. Not because we are weak. We rest so that we can again be strong. Rest is not a fallen aspect of our human condition. Rest is a part of the divine rhythm of creation. Rest is a part of what we do to prepare for the struggle of doing good. So if you are tired of the evils of the world, tired of the fight that you are feeling in your body, in your relationships, in the world around you, it's not because you are weak. It's because you are in touch with both your humanity and the divine created order around us. So prepare for the fight. Orient yourselves towards the reward, and when it's necessary, rest like Jesus did and like God did. Jesus did not grow tired of doing good. Jesus grew tired, and even within his fatigue, he did good. Jesus was oriented towards the kingdom. Jesus was oriented towards the good of the crowd, and so he had room to live out the compassion that he felt. So I pray that you will be empowered by your preparation, empowered by your orientation towards the correct reward, and empowered by the rest that you allow yourself to participate in. Let us not grow tired of doing good, but let us look towards the reward and live toward it as well. Amen.